recording. We will have the video online from the from the Kids Corner page. We have a gallery of videos and pictures. You can find pictures and video online from other programs that your kids may have attended. So welcome to Reader's Theater for this evening. The kids are going to perform Voices from the Titanic. This is arranged from the book Voices from the Disaster by Deborah Hopkinson. It's a recent book that was published. There are some main characters I just want to introduce real quickly. Violet Jessup is a stewardess. Raise your hand. Jack Thayer is a United States high school student. He's playing two parts, which is why he has the collar on. Charles Herbert Lightoller was the second officer on the ship. Father Brown is the guy with the collar. Raise your hand. Okay, Charlotte Collier is a second class passenger. And then we have Colonel Archibald Gracie. He was a first class passenger. And then we have Frankie Goldsmith on the end. He's a 9-year-old boy traveling third class. Okay? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started then. The introduction. April 15th, 2012 marked the 100-year anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Today, we will hear the story of the passengers and crew of the Titanic in their own words. Much of the script is derived from the recent book, Voices from the Disaster, by Deborah Hopkinson. Welcome to Reader's Theater.
On April 10, 1912, the world's largest and most luxurious passenger steamship, the Titanic, prepared for its maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City.
Violet Jessup had hired on as a stewardess on the Titanic, and she was thrilled with how well designed the crew's quarters were. She said of Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer,
"He was always busy taking the owners around the ship, interviewing engineers, officials, managers, agents, subcontractors, and superintending generally the work of completion."
Thomas Andrews was a very involved designer, not afraid to push up his sleeves and dig into the real work. He was incredibly satisfied with the design of the Titanic.
Life aboard started smoothly. Even Jenny, the ship's cat and part of the crew, had immediately picked herself a comfortable corner.
the fireman Joe Mulholland, who had worked on the Titanic on the way to the dock at Southampton, said later that he decided not to sign on for the main voyage across the Atlantic when saw Jenny carry her tiny kittens off, one by one, down the gangway. He thought it was a bad omen.
The Titanic was 882 feet long, about as long as 40 buses. It was 180 feet high. The height of a 17-story building, it could hold 3,547 passengers and crew, but only had 20 lifeboats, enough room to save 1,178 people. There were 2,208 aboard.
Everyone could see that the Titanic was something special.
It was clear to everybody on board that we had a ship that was going to create the greatest stir British shipping circles had ever known.
When the Titanic left Southampton, England for its maiden voyage, Father Frank Brown, who took the ship from Southampton to its stop in Ireland, took many pictures of the first hours of its voyage.
With a feeling akin to suppressed excitement, I watched the scene, for it was my first experience of actual travel in an ocean liner, and for a beginning, I could not have struck a bigger boat.
A generous American couple offered to pay Father Brown's fare all the way to America, which his religious order refused in order for him to get off that ship. So Frank left the ship with his packet of exposed plates, the only pictures of the Titanic on their maiden voyage.
Titanic, April 11th. My dear Mom and Dad, it don't seem possible that we are out on the Bernie writing to you. Well, dear, so far we are having a delightful trip. The weather is beautiful and the ship magnificent. We can't describe the table. It's like a floating town. We expect to go to Queenstown today, so I thought I would drop this with the mails. We'll post again at New York. Lots of love. Don't worry about us. Ever your loving children, Harvey and Lot and Madge.
Harvey and his wife, Charlotte, were on on the way to America, they were planning on starting a farm in Idaho. What better way to begin a new life than by sailing on the new, incredible Titanic?
The Titanic was wonderful, far more splendid and huge than I dreamed of. The other craft in the harbor were like cockle shells beside me, and they, mind you, were the boats of the American and other lines that a few years ago were thought enormous.
First class passenger Colonel Archibald Gracie was a seasoned transatlantic traveler. He couldn't help also being impressed by the Titanic.
I enjoyed myself as I were in a summer palace on the seashore, surrounded with every comfort. There was nothing to indicate or suggest that we're on the stormy Atlantic.
The first-class passengers aboard the Titanic enjoyed every possible luxury and amenity, from the dining room to their private staterooms. Second-class passengers had their own dining room, less luxurious than the first class, and a library. Third-class passengers were limited to a lower-level dining room and prohibited from mingling with other passengers.
Third-class passenger Frankie Goldsmith was excited to have plenty of places to explore on the ship, like the boiler rooms. He and his family were traveling to Michigan to join his aunt and her family for Easter night.
We young boys spent a lot of time getting back to the ship's steam boiler rooms, watching the stokers and firemen at work. They were singing songs off cooking. While we looked down at them, some of them rattling their coal shovels on the grates of the coal burners.
On board the RMS Titanic, Sunday afternoon. My dear ones all, as you see, it is Sunday afternoon. While the sailors say we have had a wonderful passage up to now, this mighty expanse of water, no land in sight, and the ship rolling from side to side is very wonderful, though they say this ship does not roll on account of the size. And anyhow it rolls enough for me. It is nice weather, but awfully windy and cold. From your loving Esther.
Jack Bayer, an American high school senior, was curiously exploring the Titanic on Sunday afternoon. Noticing the colder weather, he was not surprised when he heard that ice warnings had been received.
I remember Mr. Ismay showing us the wire regarding the presence of ice and remarking that we would not reach that position until around 9 p.m. By that time, it had become much colder. It was a brilliant starry night.
Violet was among many who were drawn out to enjoy a look at the stars that evening.
It was indeed a night for bed, warmth, and cozy thoughts of home and firesides. I thought of the man in the crow's nest as I came indoors. Surely an unenviable job on such a night.
Violet knew that the lookouts were posted 24 hours a day in the crow's nest high above the deck. Radio operators were also kept busy, sending personal messages to and from the mainland for passengers, but also the most important messages about weather and sea conditions from other ships.
Several messages warning of ice in the path of the Titanic began arriving Sunday afternoon. Titanic was about to enter an area of dangerous ice. That evening, the calm sea made it more difficult to spot ice in the water.
In the event of meeting ice, there are many things we look for. In the first place, a slight breeze. Of course, the stronger the breeze, the more visible the ice will be, or rather the breakers on the ice.
Captain Spence, on the other hand, was confident that any iceberg large enough to cause any damage would surely be spotted in time by the lookouts and officers on the bridge.
11:40 p.m. Iceberg, right ahead. Hard to starboard, hard to starboard. Astern full. There were only 37 seconds in which to react once the iceberg was spotted. They were not enough.
It was not a loud crash. It was felt almost as much as heard. I sat up in bed and looked out of the nearest port. I saw an iceberg only a few feet away, apparently racing aft at high speed and crumbling as it went. I knew right away what that meant. Henry Harper, first-class passenger.
The sensation to me was as if the ship had been seized by a giant hand and shaken once, twice, then stopped dead in its course. I was not thrown out of my berth, and my husband staggered on his feet only slightly. We heard no strange sounds, but we noticed that the engines had stopped running.
I was enjoying a good night's rest as I was
arise by a sudden shock and noise forward on the starboard side, which I at once concluded was caused by a collision. There was no mistaking that something wrong has happened, because the ship stopping at and blowing off of the
With 16 water-weight compartments, the Titanic was considered practically unsinkable. However, after striking the iceberg, too many of these compartments flooded for it to remain afloat. Captain Smith gave orders for the lifeboats to be ready. He had been told that the ship had from an hour to an hour and a half.
Violet Jessup was dedicated to her passengers. She helped people in their life jackets and encouraged them to wear something warm.
I was ordered up on deck. Calmly, passengers strolled about. I stood at the bulkhead with the other stewardesses, watching the women cling to their husbands before being put into the boats with their children. Sometime after, a ship's officer ordered us into the boat first to show some woman it was safe.
Leaving in the safety of the ship, many people were reluctant to believe in the seriousness of the emergency. They hesitated to board the lifeboats. By the time people realized the Titanic was sinking, it was clear that the lifeboats could not rescue everyone.
Women and children first. Men had to save themselves as they could. When Ellen and I came up, all the lifeboats were crowded, so no rescue was possible. You have to try to imagine it. The last moment I saw my dear sister there, stand there with little Thelma held tightly in her arms. Ernst Pearson, third-class passenger.
Someone was shouting these last few words over and over again. Women and children first, women and children first. They struck utter terror into my heart, and no, they will rise in my ears. They meant my own safety, but they also meant the greatest loss I have suffered, the life of my husband.
Colonel Gracie saw Second Officer Lightoller handing women, children, and babies into the lifeboats in rapid succession. He saw the pregnant wife of John Jacob Astor, the millionaire, being loaded into a boat. Leaning over the railing, Mr. Astor asked permission of the light hauler to enter the boat and protect his wife, which, in view of her delicate condition, seems to have been a responsible request, but the officer, intent upon his duty, knowing of the millionaire from the rest, replied, "No, sir. No men are allowed on these boats until women are loaded first."
Before we left third class, Dad put his arms around Mildred, kissing her. He then reached down, hugged my shoulders, and said, "So long, Frankie. I'll see you later."
Third class was so very far away from the boats. Many could not reach safety due to this distance. By the time the third-class passengers were allowed on deck, most of the lifeboats had already been launched.
Many were stranded on deck of the Titanic with no hope of rescue. 4 small collapsible boats left. There were still over 1,500 people still aboard. Titanic was sinking fast.
The sea came rolling up to take the great ship and the passengers and crew who remained on board. Jack Thayer, Colonel Gracie, and Charles Lightoller each made their own attempts to get clear of the sinking Titanic.
The cold was terrific. The shock of the water took the breath out of my lungs. Down and down I went, spinning in all directions.
Striking the water was like 1,000 knives being driven into one's body, and for a few moments I completely lost grip on myself.
Before I could get to my feet, I was in a whirlpool of water swinging around and round, as I still tried to cling to the railing as the ship plunged to the depths below.
It looked as if the funnel would fall on top of me. It missed me by only 20 or 30 feet. The suction of it drew me down and down, struggling and swimming practically spent.
From the lifeboats and from the water, survivors watched as the Titanic broke apart.
The huge bulk was left in black darkness, but clearly silhouetted against the bright sky. Then the next moment, the massive boilers left their beds and went thundering down with a hollow, rumbling roar through the bulkheads, carrying everything with them that stood in their way.
I saw the tail end of the ship aim straight up toward the stars in the sky. It seemed to stay that way for several minutes. Then another slight noise was heard, and it very slowly began to go lower. She assumed an absolutely perpendicular position in this amazing attitude. She remained for the space of a half minute, then she slightly took her last tragic dive to seek a final resting place.
The beautiful ship was gone. It would be hours before the Carpathia would arrive to rescue the survivors from the icy water.
The ship's band had played until Vienna. There were astonishing acts of bravery and self-sacrifice. Even so, the loss of life was heartbreaking. Unfortunately, the lifeboats only saved 712 people. Less than a third of those who started the journey on the Titanic.
Answers to the news of the tragedy sent shock waves around the world. Questions were asked. How could this have happened to a ship that had become unsinkable? Why were there not enough lifeboats to rescue everyone? Why were there so many survivors from the first and second class? So many, and so few from the third class of passengers.
Answers to these questions would be learned afterwards. Too late to make a difference in this tragedy. However, after the Titanic disaster, never again would a ship sail without sufficient lifeboats. Crews would be better trained in organizing passengers and lowering filled boats. Ships' radio operators would be on duty around the clock, and life jackets would be better designed.
The story of the Titanic has been told and retold in many movies, articles, and books. The survivors' accounts of the suffering and heartache they endured, and the lives of the men, women, and children lost that night will touch our hearts forever.
Thank you for listening to the voices from the Titanic with us today.
Great job. Everyone stand up and take a bow. Good job. Nice work. Thank you. All right, that's our show for tonight. Thank you everybody for coming, and thanks for supporting your kids. You guys can keep the scripts if you want them. If not, you can just put them on the chair. If you'd like to, you can. Sure. Autographs are extra.
Great.